on this episode, the obvious big topic, because it just dropped today, right before we came out with this show, is obviously the LCK. I'll just say shenanigans, because what they've done basically, as far as I can tell, this is classic, like right within the fucking wheelhouse of everything I've seen in League of Legends as well.
Yeah.
Is they come out with all these different, like, fucking Orwellian terms for what each of these things is. And they've purposely done it where, in classic, like, modern dystopian nightmare fashion, what you do is, when you've got a clause that really is like, the clause, fuck a young guy who's never made it in his career, you call that the, like, preventing young guys from getting fucked by evil people in esports clause. Like, they always do that. Like, whatever the clause is, the opposite in it. Like, this looks really egregious. Because I'm already reading through some of this money. It's exactly what I'm saying here. Like, they spin it. The joke is, every time they spin it, like, I'll give you my joke, because I still think my original joke is the best one for esports. You know, in the first Spider-Man movie that everyone now loves to remember, the one with Tobey Maguire, the 2002 Spider-Man movie by Sam Raimi, I always say esports, the best way you can understand esports is that fucking J. Jonah Jameson character, the one who was played by the guy in Whiplash and all stuff later, but before he was famous, obviously, right? Because if you remember, when Spider-Man comes in, he just, like, gaslights him, doesn't he? Like, no, the best thing for you kids, be a freelance. You want to be out there, like, bound in the street, because obviously that's shit for that guy, isn't it? Like, what he's saying to you there, basically, is I'm not going to pay you to do your job, but if at the end of doing your job, you can, like, give me direct value, then I'll pay you something. That's esports in a nutshell, because what you're going to see here is, this is presented as though this is for the players. Good. It is just presented to fuck the players. And what's crazy is, the reason why I think we're the only show we can even bring this kind of worms out, Monty, is because you actually have to sort of know the dark underbelly of the Korean scene anyway before this. So people who don't know some of the things from, like, Brood War, they're going to naively think this is like, oh, brilliant, this is going to be awesome, it's going to improve things, it's going to be worse. Like, if you don't know, this is actually probably going to make it worse in Korea Fight, I guess. Where should we start with all this?
All right. So I think we have to start with describing what's going on and why this is a big deal, because I think people just don't understand what's going on because it's couched in, like, very weird euphemisms and like direct translations from Korean. Like, the video that they released literally says to build this is a real quote, sustainable virtuous cycle ecosystem, which God knows what that fucking
just
means.
Word salad. That means nothing. That means nothing.
Might mean it's a direct translation of something in Korean that might mean something.
Now, it's a general warning sign. Here's a red flag for esports industry. As soon as they use the word sustainable, they are almost certainly a crook or a liar. Because think about this logically, right? The word sustainable, you know, from the game League of Legends, sustain, it implies that you can take something back and continue, right? How could you ever, in an industry where you lose millions and millions, just by losing a little bit less, how would that sustain you? By definition, it wouldn't sustain you. You are still losing. So anytime that term's used, by the way, be very wary, because it's never used, I'll notice, by the cool people. It's always used in, like, because what they're trying to imply there, by the way, I'll tell you what the translation of sustainable is. Like, let me do this thing or I'm losing more money. That's what they really mean. Like, they don't mean anything on your behalf or sustaining all of it, because that makes it sound like we're in some fucking we got to have a sustainable source of energy and food for our new commune of League of Legends. Like, what is that? It's nothing, is it? It's fucking business, for fuck's sake. Sports.
So it's also, you have to ask the question, sustainable for whom? And the answer is for the franchised LCK teams. And I think we have to start this by reminding people that LCK teams previously tried to institute a salary cap within this league after franchising occurred. So they already tried some shenanigans in terms of capping player salaries. And this is just a cleverer version of that exact same thing. And what's so egregious about this, guys, is that, look, I'm not a lawyer, but the reason why there can't be a salary cap in the LCS is because in America, it's an antitrust violation. It's illegal in order for them to institute a salary cap unilaterally, the teams in the league, without there being a players' union to negotiate for players' rights. So let's be very clear.
Basically, every time you've ever seen in sports that they have the lockout and the players and the season doesn't start. The reason the season doesn't start is because legally they can't contract the players until they agree yes or no to the collective bargaining agreement. So what happens is, if they as en masse as player group with the union say we don't agree to this, they actually can't have a season. They have to wait until the two parties can agree on something so people can start working again. So essentially, by the way, for this as well, the other part you have to shade in, because obviously we'll get in a minute to some of the history of Korean esports, the crazy shenanigans they have always pulled, especially when there was no Big Daddy Riot. Like, they wouldn't even have asked about this. They would have just put this in place in the Brood War days. But this just looks to me, Monty, especially that first part about the rookie development, that just screams like this is essentially, I'll give you the analogy, this is basically a form of protectionism to try and stop China taking all the young talent, etc. That's what it immediately screams to me. Because this sounds to me like a bunch of boomer Kesper people got in a room and were like, why is old PL winning all these things? And don't they have Korean players? Isn't this Scout? Wasn't he on your T1 there, Mr. Joe Marsh? As though he's in the fucking meeting, but I'm pretending he is. You know what I mean? Like, this just looks like they're trying to take these measures to stop that.
Yeah, and to Joe Marsh's credit, if we were to believe the inferences from his tweets, which is just like, he tweeted some like Lord of the Rings shit with like, you know, a soldier against an oncoming army. I don't think Joe Marsh wanted this. He's not going to come out and say it, but he makes it very obvious his opinions via GIFs. Like, this was happening last night at like midnight my time when all this was coming out. But there's kind of three different clauses to this. And as you say, Thorin, the rookie development clause is essentially a salary cap for rookies. That is essentially what it is. And there is no players union in Korea to negotiate against this. So again, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that this would be illegal in the United States to do this, because it is...
So basically, it looks sort of like a fucked up version of the NFL franchise tag, but that you can just force onto a player. So essentially what happens is, if you get some young guy, the best example would be like, think of like the Young-hoon guy who's on Astralis now. Maybe he was like a sub player on Kongdu or whatever, you know, and they notice and they just go, he has a little bit of prospect, tag him up. Now, true, it does have clauses like you have to play and you have to get your salary. That's not bad, but even so, it's clearly like, essentially to me, there's an obvious predatory component of this. Like, that just seems obvious, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's so many potential issues with this, and the devil is in the details. So there are some things that will make this okay, but the fact that LCK has not released these details makes me incredibly suspicious, because if they were proud of how they're protecting the players, I would assume they would announce that with the announcement, but it seems like they're trying to cover up a bunch of bullshit underneath this. Again, I could be wrong, so we have to take the information. There has been no information in Korean or English, full documentation that has come out about this yet. Once that comes out, it might be Four Horsemen time, depending on how bad it is, to like break it down with an actual lawyer and have these discussions. But as it stands right now, the information is this. There are three different things they're trying to do. One of them, as Thorin referred to, was the rookie development clause, which is basically trapping rookies in contract prison for 2 additional years, which is fucking insane. There's LCK agent certification, which is KESPA certifying agents, which via a test, like they're being very vague around it. It's like a standardized test, which obviously is just, if you know anything about the history of KESPA, is clearly just ripe for corruption and cronyism, basically.
I'll give you the translation on that one. When they say, congratulations, there will now be a KESPA-approved agent certification, what that means is KESPA will now make money by taking money from people who are agents and limit who can be an agent.
Yes.
So now, in other words, remember, KESPA essentially is the teams in Korea. Like, why the fuck would the teams get any say in who your agent is? Think how mad that is. By the way, the most obvious angle that opens up is, say you go to war with these guys, like an agent should, by the way, sometimes, with a massive team. You go to war for your player. At the end of it all, they just blacklist you out the fucking whole LCK. That's what's probably going to happen, right?
Right. Like,
they revoke your license or whatever.
The problem is like, KESPA is supposed to represent the league and the teams, but if they're certifying the agents, as you say, Thorin, like it's the agent's responsibility to go to war for the team. So basically it creates a conflict of interest for agents who then have to be nice, play nice by KESPA rules when that shouldn't be their job. So that's hugely problematic. And also this will lead directly to either them charging fees for the standardized test to take it, right? So KESPA will just make money, or straight up corruption, bribery, basically. Like, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it certainly opens the door to that, right? And you don't want that door even remotely near you in this instance. And the other one is that now they are doing basically what Thorin said was a pre-contract policy. So this is to allow teams to negotiate before a player becomes a free agent. And the exact rules around this are a little bit shaky. And I've actually collected all the information. And plus, I have my own sources, obviously, guys, about what this is likely to look like. So we're going to get into all of that. But before we go into KESPA, because that's really about the agent certification, let's talk about why this rookie development clause is so shit. So first off, we have to remember that the minimum pay for an LCK player is 60 million won per year, which is about 45,000 US dollars under the exchange rate's really bad right now. It's very much in favor of the US dollar. Typically, that would probably be, previously probably would have been like $55,000 approximately. So it's not a lot of money, right? And so the minimum value that a lot of these rookies are getting, if they are on the minimum contracts, is quite low. And so what happens is if a player has less than one split of experience in the LCK or less than 1 year, a full year of experience in a foreign League of Legends professional leagues, then you are eligible for this development clause, which means that once you have played more than 50% of the total LCK Challenger League game, and remember what I said earlier, that minimum salary was for LCK, not for Challenger League. So I don't know what the Challenger League players are getting paid. In one split, or 25%. So if you play a quarter of the LCK games or half of the Challenger games in one split, you are eligible to basically just get your contract extended. When these conditions are met, the team, critically, not the player, the team can decide whether or not to exercise the clause. When activated, the team will have the right to extend the contract of the players for 2 years, 2 full seasons. So it's not even the season you're in, it's the next 2 full years. The player is guaranteed a steady salary increase, which I have heard is 20%, which is not a lot when you're making $45,000 a year, right? That's
if
basically
an LPL team's going to come in and pay you $2 million or something.
Exactly. It's like an additional 10 grand a year, guys. Okay, for after your first year, and continuous playing time during the contract period. So basically, the player is also being given a certain amount of guaranteed playing time.
Think how crazy that is for a second, because what you have to do whenever you take a case like this, this is where Riot always fucks up, and all the TOs and esports do. What you do is you take it and you do a dry run. You imagine a scenario where a player comes along, like it's happened in history. How would this have affected him? So I'll give you an obvious example, Monte. The example I think you've got to give, because we're talking about LCK here, is when you get some like prodigy who in year one they're a god. So Faker, how about fucking Chovy on Griffin, Showmaker on Dam? These people in year one were the best in the world, guys. So what that means is in year one, now this LCK team would be able to go, oh, thanks for playing really well. I'm going to trap you in this contract for 2 more years now. You won't be going and getting $5 million from LPL because I'm just going to give you the 20% increase. I'm going to make sure you play the minimum amount of playing time. By the way, there's even an element there I could even add in, which is when you consider the amount of like wasted games in BO3s in LCK, there's even a world where you could play some shenanigans with your roster and have the 6th guy sort of trapped while he's playing just enough games to meet the requirement. I could see so many ways this could be, because basically one thing I would very quickly take as a bigger point to understand this whole issue is this. Essentially, KESPA is like, just think of it as, in this case, mainly the teams. It is the T1s, the Gen Gs of the world. It's also other elements, like it's the people who run LCK themselves connected. But basically, what you need to understand is, despite the fact they're going to present it's the Esports Association, it's everyone. In reality, this is just cartelism. It's just people who are getting together. And what they're going to do, and this is a key point to understand here, is you're going to think naively as a fan that KT is against T1 because in the game they're against each other. They are in the game against each other, but I'll tell you what, if you understand how business works, KT and T1, the orgs, are way more aligned against their own players than against each other. And I can tell you from my own experience in Flashpoint in CSGO and from seeing how people operated in Overwatch League and even LCS, that as a general rule, they will always side with the other owner in their little franchise cartel league than against like each other and battle each other. Like they won't destroy each other ever, guys. So the problem here basically is, whereas these teams are supposed to, think about any other economic system system in the world. KT has to battle T1 for T1's players. In this case, KT and T1 essentially just go behind the scenes and go, look, there's no point us being silly and fighting. Why should you pay 3 million and I pay 2 million? If we both make an agreement, sure, we might not always get the player we want, but we only ever play 1 million. They will agree to that in a heartbeat, I'm telling you right now. That's why, I'd even say that's the impetus as well as the LPL thing for why they've done this. Because we've already done one clause. It's already predatory as fuck.
I don't think this probably applies to T1. I think probably who was pushing
That's just an example, of course. I'm just giving the example of the big names, of course.
Yeah. I think the teams that were probably pushing for this are the worst teams that don't want to pay money. But
maybe the mid-table ones, I'd guess, yeah.
So basically, you're let's say you're playing this year and you're a rookie, right? And it's 2022. Well, then your contract might be extended through the end of 2024 with only a year-over-year percentage-based increase, which if you're making the league minimum, even if you're not making the league minimum, you're not making $1 million as a rookie, like straight up, right?
No way, of course not.
So you basically just get trapped in a rookie contract. And again, this happens in professional sports when there are players' unions to negotiate other things, such as guarantees. Like, there's no mention that this money is guaranteed. In fact, basically, if the only way the player can get out of this is if they don't get their minimum playing time, which means they're probably bad, which means they're not going to get out of this contract. But we have no information about, is the 2 years fully guaranteed money? So if the team chooses not to play the player, right, and the player doesn't opt out of the contract, do they continue to get paid that same amount of money? These are the things that the players' union is necessary to negotiate so that they do have protections, right? There's a balance to be made between the sustainability of the league and the protection of the players, but there is no information in any of this about the protection of the players. So you could have a fantastic player now playing for 3 years on what is effectively garbage money compared to what they could earn. Here's another question about the rookie contracts. Can they be sold? Like, what happens if I can sell this player for $2 million to a different LCK team? That LCK team inherits that rookie player contract, is paying them $80,000 a year until the termination of that contract. Like, it could be a way for LCK teams to profit massively from selling the contracts to each other.
Here's another angle to think on that as well, Monty. What that essentially implies, because what you're saying, I imagine, is actually how it will work in reality. What that means is this: the team at any point in time can recognize you're worth millions and sell you for millions. You just can't ever make the millions yourself. Do you see the problem there? As in, if you're the player, you either stay playing for Team A till the end of the 3 years or 2 years they've added to your contract, or whereas you and your agent the next year would have signed for 2 million to some LPL team, they'll just sell you to them, but they'll make all the money. You won't make them. That'll be their transfer fee. That'll go to the team. You won't make any of that. You'll just be playing for that team at that point in time.
And clearly, this doesn't help the players at all.
It doesn't anywhere. Like you said, the way it doesn't.
It prevents them from getting fair market value for their skills. Players in esports obviously have shorter careers typically. They also rise faster. As Thorin pointed out, think about all these players who in the first year of their career were absolutely amazing. Remember, this is the first full year of Zeus's career. He played some last spring, but he could have been tagged under this rookie system and then contracted under garbage till the end of next year, basically. And so it prevents players from actually developing and getting the fair market value. And let's be real, guys. The reason this is happening is because Korean teams do not want to pay the fair market value for those players compared to other regions. China will just pay more than these teams want to pay. That's all it is. That's what it boils down to. Because otherwise, they could just make the same offer as a Chinese team to keep that player that they developed.
Here's why
they do that.
The part people are going to miss about this is what I said earlier about economic system. You know how I always make that point in the modern day, Monty, that there's only so many problems in like NA, LCS I can fix, because some of them are just like cultural problems. The United States of America, the country, has like way bigger than something like I could solve on a talk show. It's the same in this scenario, Monty, because what fans aren't going to understand is this what we're talking about exactly now. This is how business is done in Korea. Korea, it literally is a country of cartelism. It is chaebols, which are just giant fucking like families. Like essentially, just think of them like Blade Runner. That's why I always say it's like the tech companies in Blade Runner, the top of the fucking big skyscraper. That's what it's like. So basically, that's the way by default things are done in Korea. It's why I said earlier, if this wasn't like the whole riot effect and the fact that there's a riot Korea and Tencent, they wouldn't even be messaging it this way. They'd just do it and they'd say, fuck you. What can you do about Wake Esper? Because if people don't know, there's an example from StarCraft Brood War, which was the game that Kesper had full control over, because it was before Blizzard came along, hence the famous lawsuit in the early 2010s and tested the IP rights thing in Korea. So when Kesper felt like they owned and ran StarCraft, all you need to know is this: even though the players who were at the top level, it was always reported, were making enormous salaries. They were making actually way bigger salaries than anyone in esports in the West until I'd say about maybe 7-8 years ago. They were making people like Flash and them were making $300,000 salaries a year. But here's the problem. They already had a system like this for how you could transfer, right? There wasn't a transfer market and there was no such thing traditionally as being a free agent. What would happen was this: if you wanted to go to another team, even though listen, someone could correct me if I'm wrong on this. There might be some details I could be incorrect about, but I'm pretty sure I remember correctly. Even if your contract is ended, Monty, it was treated as though you were still in some mad sense owned by the team you played for. And when a new team wanted to sign you, they not only had to like get the team to agree, not you didn't just go and agree with that team. They had to get the team to agree to transfer you. And this is the maddest detail. I believe there was some insane clause, which is pure protectionism, if you understand the implication of this, where the new team who signs you has to sign you, pay your salary, but then pay your old salary to your old team while you're not even there anymore. Something. So as a result, if you can't see the obvious thing they're doing there, what they're meaning there is, well, who's going to win in this negotiation, boys? Would you like to sign for my team again? Well, I can just offer you 300k because I'm not paying anything extra. Or can my rival sign you? He has to pay you the 300k and me 300k and whatever else fee. Like, can you see how obviously those deals just aren't going to happen? And spoiler, that's why, and this is why I think they've done this, Monty, that's why in StarCraft Brood War, there wasn't a lot of player movement. You didn't get big, like, there was no LeBron James shit where, like, Flash and Jedi are like, hey, let's team up together. Like, that wasn't even the thing. You just stayed on the same team pretty much your whole career until you were shit. And this is why, because they constructed the system from day one to essentially give every edge to your org because they were paying the money. So, unfortunately, I can sort of see, like, there's echoes of that in this. I think they're trying to reassert some of that control, because the problem they have is, like I said, it's gotten out of control for Koreans. Essentially, they're having to face all the negatives of like a Western free market, but without any of the upsides of their scene. So they're like, fix this shit now. So hence Kesper comes in.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that, as far as I am aware, there are no players' unions in sports in Korea either. So this is a business practice that I assume they are at least partially porting over from their like baseball and basketball leagues, where again the players are not represented. And as you say, in Brood War, in the prime of Brood War, there were no big changes of players from team to team, except when players went to the military and then joined the military's team, Air Force Ace. That was basically it. Like Boxer creating Air Force Ace when he had to go to the military was one of the only times in which that happened. And the team Air Force Ace was made by the Korean military so he could play during his military service. But yes, otherwise, obviously, that wasn't the thing. So this is obviously hugely problematic that these Korean rookie players can get trapped into what are effectively very, very low value contracts, because again, nobody's going to be paying a rookie $1 million out of the gate. So there's no benefit to the players here. There's absolutely no benefit to the players. And people will say, well, what about the guaranteed salary increases, and which is again bullshit because they're working with probably very low salaries, and the guaranteed playing time. This isn't necessary to get guaranteed playing time. The players' agents can negotiate contracts with guaranteed playing time. They can already do that. They could do that at any point in time. So it's not a big deal. Like if a player was valuable and a team really wanted them, the agent could say, you must start this player for the next 2 years, every single game, unless the player opts out. That's just a thing you could put in a contract. So it's not actually providing any kind of meaningful protection for the rookie players by having minimum numbers of games, because that was already on the table in a negotiation anyway.
I actually always thought, by the way, as a random aside, that was one area that Koreans, I mean, it's how you know they only gave a fuck about the money when they went to LPL. I've always thought if I was one of those big name Koreans who'd won Worlds and I went to LPL, I'd have that fucking clause from day one, mate. You're definitely not benching me for some fucking LDL player and having me sink like save into the fucking depths and just never be seen ever again. Like, that ain't happened to me or me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm amazed people didn't do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that could certainly be part of a contract already. So it doesn't really do anything. You could also, obviously, in a contract,
or if you're the shy, obviously you have a clause where it's like at any moment I cannot play a tank. I can veto the tank. I love shit like that. You got really self-indulgent, you know.
But I mean, also you could negotiate year over year salary increases. Like, it's not that difficult. So it doesn't provide any protection to players. That's just a smoke screen for this bullshit. On to the next one, LCK agent certification. Now, we touched on this already, but how can a governing body that has a long-standing association with the oldest teams in Korea, like KT and SKT, vet and approve agents who will be negotiating with those teams?
I can tell you from the sports I follow, things like the NBA, the NFL, European soccer to some degree in terms of business stuff. All I can tell you is this. If this rule existed in those sports, the entire landscape would be completely different and players would make way less money. Because the joke is, this is why I said it's so dodgy, it's Kesper doing this. Because in other sports, like especially European soccer, by the way, people hate the most successful agents. The teams hate them, Monte, because they're too good. Yeah, they're fucking amazing. They know how to get the absolute max value out of the player, how to bring in between the teams, the timing of it. So the joke is, if they had to be certified, they'd just never certify that fucking guy, would they? Like, it's just obvious, isn't it? You'll just get a bunch of yes men to the Kesper regime, basically.
And people who will not speak out, who will not fight properly for the players. It basically puts a leash onto the agents, while simultaneously, who knows how much these tests are going to cost to take? They're not going to be free, guys. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, of course not.
Also, it limits who can be an agent. Are they going to offer these tests in Chinese or English so that other people from outsiders can represent players, especially players that want to participate in other leagues or have those opportunities? Of course they're not. Of course they're not, guys. They're not gonna issue this test in Chinese or English. So it's creating basically 100% Korean cartel of agents within Korea who will all bow and kiss the ring to Kespa and the LCK.
By the way, I could see
if they don't. Oh, too bad you failed your test. Too bad. Oh, that's such a shame.
And let's be real. This is where you've got to learn if you're an American. You have been subjected to propaganda for years where you're not allowed to ever believe your country's allowed to succeed. Spoiler, they wouldn't even sell what Monte's just said as a negative, by the way. That would be sold as a positive because he'd be selling the idea that, like, Korean work for Koreans in Korea with Korea. Like, essentially, that would be
Korean
popular in Korea. Sure. They would love that because essentially that's another reason they're also doing this, Monte. It's another aspect of how they're doing it with this goes like this to me. Look, even if this fucking Korean guy ends up being good and does go to LPL, tell you what, we're going to profit off it. He can go there, but there better be millions coming back this way. Because essentially, I can't believe it took this long to put the fucking genie back in the bottle. But what happened here is, this is how slow Korea is. They've taken this long, guys, since the end of 2014 to realise maybe it doesn't make sense that we can have people win the World Championship in our game and then the next day be like, well, I have no contract anymore, so I can now freely walk across the fucking sea and go to China. And now I'm a Chinese player helping China win the Worlds. Like, if you're Korean and someone's like, we've got to fix that. Somewhere there's a loophole there. Can we just solve that? Like, they're solving it now. I'll tell you right now, they're solving it right this moment, mate.
Yep. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. It's very clear because they don't want to pay money. And they're trying to be competitive while suppressing player wages because they don't want to pay the money. That's literally the only reason any of this is being done. They are trying to make it as difficult as possible for players to get paid during their prime of their career. And make it as team favored as they could possibly make it, while simultaneously giving Kespa a new source of revenue, whether that's through charging for agent tests or licenses, or, frankly, guys, you don't know how Korean business works. There's a lot of under the table money that gets thrown around. There's a lot of bribery, guys. There's a lot of it. That's not saying it's going to happen. Who can know? But I suspect it will happen. I suspect it will because it always happens. So I think probably there's going to be some kickbacks as well from the agents in order to get these licenses or to get favorable treatment by Kespa. But it's a huge conflict of interest that just shouldn't exist. I agree. And I understand the problem that they're trying to solve. There has been a lot of corruption from agents, Like, there's been a bunch of bullshit, and something needs to be done.
Actually, for Korean Chinese agents, they're probably some of the worst in the industry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree that something needs to be done, but this is clearly like not the way to do it. It invites a different kind of corruption, basically.
Let's just tie two stories together. This is also, look, it's not a direct response, but this is essentially one way also of addressing some of the issues of like the Peter Zhang TSM story.
Sure.
That's an example of potentially corruption involving agents and go-betweens and all that jazz. By the way, Monty, one thing I really love, because the devil really is in the details. What I love about reading things from other cultures is obviously it's just a wash in their culture and their way of thinking and their perception. So they include this line here. And to you guys, you might even naively think this line sounds cool until you just realize, why the fuck would you ever phrase it that way if you're actually a normal person? Are you ready? Are you ready for this part? This is from the third part, the LCK pre-contract policy, which is basically them describing a really shit, fucked up version of what was already a normal contract negotiation, but that involves like loads more like fucking red tape and potential for the team to fuck you before you ever. So at the end of it all, right, after the teams have done all these things, like they've contacted the team and made an offer for the contract, and then they've seen the contract and they've gone back and forth. At the end, they put this line, and the way they phrase it, it's so good. It just goes like this. It goes, let me see the exact phrase. The players can make the final decision after examining the conditions of the offers. So at the end, they think, this is how fucked in the head they are. At the end, they go, and you know what? At the end, the player can even choose if he goes to the team. Like, the idea they're even putting that in and selling it as a pot, that tells you the worldview they're coming from. Yes. They're sort of saying, he is our property, but you know what? As a laugh, let's pretend he had say at the end. Like, essentially, we've already agreed. The team's agreed to terms, new team's agreed. At the end, we'll even let him say, does he say yes or no? Yeah, that's mad, I love the way that's phrased, mate. I love everything about it.
I actually think the third part of this could be done right, but probably will be done wrong. So this is the least egregious part of this entire thing. But again, the devil will be in the details. And because they have omitted the details, I have a sinking feeling that the details are probably done.
You could, in theory, by the vague thing we have written down, argue it's a way of like making there's no problem with poaching, like it gets past some of those issues. Also, because obviously Riot has their own very peculiar poaching angle compared to esports. But as you say, it's so vague. I can't really know how it's going to be applied.
Yeah, and also I think there is a problem, I think, with like franchise players and developing long-term fan bases that it would be nice to address in League of Legends, because that is having the reliability.
I was making this point yesterday, Monty. 2 days ago, I did one of my Patreon donated discussions. It hasn't come out yet. And the guy was asking basically the classic question that every topic comes up from LCS fans, which is, why is LCS not as interesting? Well, one point I made to this guy, but I think it's a pretty apt point, is the heyday of when LCS was at its best was when you had established superstars that stayed on those teams. Bjergsen didn't just join Cloud9 the next season. He stayed in TSM forever. Fucking Jensen was his rival in Cloud9/Team Liquid. Then Doublelift went between the fact that you had some stability actually made these narratives. They lasted years and years. Now every year we just re-up and just fucking, like, every year everyone gets Hooney for a year. That's not a fucking story. That's just the opposite of a story. It's actually shit if everyone in the league had Hooney. That's just garbage at that point, isn't it?
Right. So, like, I do agree that it does help to have franchise players that are getting paid, but we'll get to how that happens in sports like the NFL and the NBA soon, after we discuss what this policy actually is.
Sure.
So this is very difficult to understand, and I've had to like pull from some of my sources to kind of get the parameters. So this may not be entirely accurate because the details are not there, but this is how I understand it is working right now. And it's not going to be for this year. It's going to start at the end of next year, guys, just so you're clear. The other things are starting right now. This is starting next year. The pre-contract policy. So basically, when a player is going to have reached the end of their contract and reach what is currently free agency, every team can designate one player whose contract is going to expire as to basically what we'll call franchise tagging. And they submit that player. So let's just give an example.
People who know the NFL concept are going to get the premise.
Right. Yeah. So basically what happens is, let's just say, now Chovy's contract was just renewed, so it's not going to be Chovy, to be clear, but we'll just use Chovy. So let's say Chovy's contract was expiring at the end of this year.
The face of one of the big teams.
Yeah, or Faker's contract actually is expiring at the end of this year. So let's use Faker. Faker's contract is expiring. So T1 will then designate Faker as a pre-contract negotiation, and they will tell LCK, Faker is our player. So what happens is that the LCK announces the list of all of the players who have been selected for this publicly before their contracts end. Then other teams are free to contact. It's unclear whether it's the team or the LCK, but one of the two entities or both of the entities can contact and make requests for this player. So again, this is before the contract expires. There is then a space of 1 week where the player can select 3 of the teams that contacted about their services, about their next contract, basically. Those 3 teams and the team that they are currently on have the opportunity to put an offer in on the player. At the end of that week-long period, the team that currently contracts the player has a chance to respond to those other offers, potentially to offer a bigger contract, right, or more favorable terms. And then, so basically there's a rebuttal from the team that they're currently playing for, which kind of allows them to, it's not exactly a right of first refusal, but kind of the same thing. Because right of first refusal would mean that they could just match an offer and that player would have to take the next contract. So the player could still select, a lesser amount of money, it appears right now. So this is all to say, though, that the player will have 4 offers, ostensibly, and then the current team will have the best chance of keeping the player by being able to make a final offer. And the reason why I like this is that obviously it will be a market value, mostly, we'll get into mostly, for that player, because there are other offers coming in. We assume the player will pick other big teams that would give them good offers or give them a good playing environment, give them good teammates. And it allows the team in question to actually be able to create a roster during the offseason effectively, because as we've discussed many times on this show, one of the big issues is you don't know what pieces you have when the offseason starts, especially if a player's in free agency. So this will help the teams build out the rest of their roster, because they will know by the time free season starts whether they have this player or not, which I think is actually important, that you know whether you have the player that you most want to keep. So this isn't really the big deal of all of this, because the players are able to test the waters of free agency in a limited fashion. They can also pass on all the offers. It doesn't explicitly say this, but I think they can pass on all the offers and just enter total free agency at the end of this if they want. So they have that opportunity.
That's the part I'm skeptical about as to whether that's why I wonder if there is like a time.
That's an assumption.
Because here's the thing, there's a couple of things I can see just in the phrasing here that are a bit concerning to me. One goes like this. This is why the lack of details is what kills this, because you can't determine if this is good or not until you know how it would be executed.
Yes.
So one area that already I find concerning is they described it like this, Monty. So as you say, the team picks the player, then once they tell LCK is like, here's the big list in the off-season of all the players that have been selected. Then, as you say, new teams come forwards. They say, well, I want to make an offer. Then the player looks at those offers and his team comes back to him with their final offer, right? And he decides, am I going to leave or am I going to stay? Here's the problem, right? That entire process is like an ordered thing. Like it goes linear, like this happens, this happens. But at the end, they just throw this in there with no explanation. They just go, are you ready for the way this is written? They go, if the player decides to transfer to a different team,
yes,
the new team has to pay a transfer fee to the original team. Whoa, stop. That's an entire story right there. What happens if they don't agree on the fee? What if I only give you 50k? What if the original team says we don't agree on the fee? Does the whole thing start again? How does this work?
So as I understand it, this fee is going to be a percentage of the player's deal. And it's
new deal, presumably.
New deal.
Right.
It goes further, Thorin. When transferring to a team in a foreign league, an additional amount. So it will cost more for China to
that's also where it's
buy one of these players.
Guys, because what they're basically saying there is everyone in LCK gets a discount on these players. So you can still go to a foreign league, but now Jack has to pay like 1.5 times whatever your amount is, instead of T1 could just pay 1 times that amount. Yeah, exactly.
And basically what this means is that I assume what happens is you only pay the fee if you are one of the limited teams who can make the offer before the contract technically expires. Now the fee would go away once the player's contract hits free agency because they have no contract anymore. So, but there's still like tons of shenanigans that could happen here, guys. First off, it's obvious that teams will be like, I'm going to put an offer in, but wink, wink. Once you're actually a free agent, that offer is going to go up, right? Because
you could even say if they did this in a clever way, this could be like an advert for like, but don't take this one yet. Just wait. There might be more after. Yeah, exactly. The joke is, why am I paying this fee to them when I could just give you this fee next week?
Right, exactly. Or half you get half the fee by waiting, right? Yep. So it's obviously like going to be abused. So I don't even know how you police this. And secondly, the other problem here is that it's still, by doing this, you are still potentially suppressing player value. And why I say that is, let's say a team has a $1 million budget for a player, right? They have a budget, they have to operate within this budget. Well, now they have to factor in the cost of the transfer fee, which is like, let's say I'm offering a 3-year, $3 million deal, and the transfer fee is 20% of that deal. Well, that's $600,000. So what I'm really offering now is a 3-year, $2.4 million deal, because my budget says I only have the $3 million.
Think how dark this is, Monte. It actually incentivizes teams to collectively, again, now notice, here's the problem, Monte. In a free market, you'd be fucked if you offered less, because you wouldn't win the deal, would you? But what if all of us collectively just offer less anyway? That way the transfer fee's less because the total contract's less. Remember, the downside of this is you're all going to think it's like a Western market. This is essentially like if you had 8 people and you make a rule that's going to only benefit us. Like by the way, the end goal of this, realistically, is the players don't move. They stay at their team for the team
stay for less money.
Yeah, the team gets a deal that they benefit from. Exactly.
So, let's just say the value of the the value of the player is $3 million. This is what the player would get paid without this fee. So the Chinese team offers $2.4 million plus a $600,000 transfer fee, which is 20% of the total contract value, right? Like that's what they can afford. So at that point in time, the LCK team comes back and offers $2.5 million. So they're getting a $3 million player at a $500,000 discount. And that's the problem with this, is that it creates these scenarios where if a team does have a budget, it basically guarantees that the player, even a superstar player, is going to get paid under market value, because there are now additional bullshit fees that have to be included. Yes. And the other thing about this might, and I understand the teams want to recoup that money from their free agent because they're going to have to spend big to replace that player in free agency. But again, there's no protections for the players. Like maybe if the result of the new contract was a fully guaranteed deal, so the player knows that no matter what happens, no matter what, if they get benched, their contract cannot be canceled, then maybe it's worth taking the $600,000 discount, right? In order to just make sure that your money's guaranteed. But there isn't any protection for the player here, as far as we know, because they haven't released these details. And it is super suspicious that they would not have, for PR reasons, said, here are the benefits to the players. As far as I can tell, there's no benefits to the players in this situation, besides odds are that they get less money on their contracts. And they don't have any protections. They don't have any guarantees. And that's obviously super shit. So this is protectionism from the LCK, and I don't know how you can look at this and say that this is a good thing. In the NBA, for example, there are good incentives for a player to stay on their team, because you can only get supermax contract extensions by staying on your team. So you can get more money if the team that you're on is willing to pay you more money. Then they can basically exceed the salary cap of a one player in order to offer that player, to give that player the most amount of money to stay on their current team. That's a good way to incentivize it. Now, you can't do that without a salary cap, because in theory, League of Legends, a player could make infinity dollars because there's no salary cap and there's no, maximum contract value, because again, there's no players union. So all of this is very insidious in the way that it is designed. And like we said, there could be details that come out where this is good because it offers significant protections to the players. But because they haven't mentioned those things, I think we have to assume that those protections do not exist, and that this is essentially just a racket that is being created by the LCK and the teams because they don't want to pay fair market value to players.
The joke is, and I'm purposely picking this because of obviously the context that what me and Monte just did the last few years. The joke is, this is basically why things like Flashpoint existed. Because when massive teams start noticing that their costs go up and their margins are worse and that they're losing money and that they invest in talent and bring it up and then it goes to another, what they're going to do is exactly this. They're just going to go, right, well, if there's not a way I can fix it manually, what if me and a bunch of other powerful people get together? Can we make a deal together that cuts some of these costs? Or let's just do a deal that we sort of sell players to each other but for not as much, or we have a special system. Like, it's obvious they do this. Like, basically, the like you say, they couldn't even come up with some spin as to why it's good for players. All they did was, like, the part about the agent certification is just a shitty appeal to authority. Like, we'll be Kesper certified. I know who Kesper is, man. That's a bad thing, if anything. You know what I mean? You're making it sound good. That's bad. So same, and then the rest of it, like as you pointed out, is essentially just like illustrating for fans how like an agent could help you get more money, but then making it like part of some fucked up formal system instead of, you know, the agent just being competent. Like, the joke is, if that certification thing worked, you wouldn't need the rest of these fucking clauses, because you'd have certified a real agent who would get the guy the proper fucking transfer fee and would get him more money per. So that's all. Like, again, that's the most insidious part, Monty, is that part. It's like I said earlier, anytime they're fucking you, they'll present it that they're doing you a favor. So in that scenario, they make it sound like, but you'll get a year-on-year increase because I'll make sure you never get what you should see. Like, that's just, they're so fucked in how they phrase it in the message.
Because you're getting paid $45,000 a year. And so, you know, next year you'll make $55,000. Woo! You could be the best player in the world. Like, Zeus is arguably the best player. He's in contention for best player in the world right now. That could be his life, guys. That literally in this system, it is garbage, and you have to wonder what the effects. I'll tell you a good
thing though. Here's the thing though. This is where you have to understand the difference between what you would enjoy and what is right morally. Like, I'm totally against a lot of these things in principle, Monty, but for my own selfish reasons. Like, I actually do like the fact that, like, probably going to get some mega Korean world champions soon if they keep all the fucking talent in Korea. Sure, like, now you won't just leave and mess all the storylines up. Now you will get fucking Rookie against Faker forever because they'll be in LCK playing each other for the whole fucking careers. Now you will get these stories of people staying in the same team because they'll be incentivized to get. That's all great for me narratively. It's just, as I say, the problem is for the individual player, it's almost inarguably worse.
Well, yeah. And it also just doesn't have to be this way. And again, maybe it's not this way. Because they may not have released these details, but obviously, like, we're incredibly suspicious about that. But it doesn't have to be this way. They could do things like offer bonuses or fully guaranteed contracts or things that would be good for the players at the same time. And it could be a negotiation. But the thing is, there is no union. There is no players' body to negotiate against. So why would they do that? There isn't a push and pull here. This is a unilateral decision. And also, it's unilateral because they said nothing about fucking talking to the players. There wasn't, well, we got together with a council of 10 players, one representative from each team, and came to this agreement. That didn't fucking happen. This was just decided and then announced. So it's probably not great for the players. Now, I agree with you, Thorin. From a viewer perspective or from the league's perspective, this is fucking awesome. Like, I think it probably will accomplish some of the goals, such as making the league more competitive, creating real fan bases around legacy players on certain teams. It will also help the teams be able to build rosters because now they will have known pieces that they will have for an extended period of time, or at least that they can make, they're guaranteed that they can make the most competitive offer and then lock that player down before they ever hit free agency. And these are all important to the success and health of the franchises and the success and health of the league. But the issue is that there isn't any give to the players here, is just take from the league. And that is fucked up. And it is just straight up illegal in the United States for these reasons. But antitrust law is very weak in Korea. As far as I know, the professional sports athletes do not have these unions either. It's going to be,
when they last time Faker like re-upped his contract and did a deal with, but what was the like rough number they said? They said he was in like tens of millions of dollars or something now, wasn't he? Wasn't it like a $20 million contract or something?
Yeah, something like that over 2
because
years.
Basically the point to make is this, right? This is where you have to understand again, Korea is not the United States of America. And more importantly, it never will be. As in, you are not going to turn the fucking steamboat of their cultural values for a fucking video game. So as you might see by the way that a lot of the messaging is written down here, the implication, and this is sort of how they think, I'm afraid, the implication is that they do sort of feel like they, the team that brought you up, own that player. They sort of, here's what they essentially feel like. They feel like if I brought you into my team and then for a few years I coached you and you became a good player, why do you then just get to go and someone else benefits from you being a good player? I made you. Like, I made you the player you are. So I should somehow profit from your career for the rest of it, right? The point is, in the West, that would be considered like exploitative, wouldn't it? Like, no one would agree with that. But that's how people think even there. Like, if people don't understand, the work culture over there is not, they're not explicitly mandating this. I'll give you an example. I used to have a Korean girlfriend, right, who used to keep working until like 11 at night. And she would always be getting me to meet her, Monte, at like 1 in the morning in like Hongdae. And I'd be like, why don't we just meet at 9 or something? She'd be like, I had to work overtime again. And I was like, all right, at least you get paid in that. She's like, oh no, it wasn't like overtime, like you get paid. I just had to work more hours. And I was like, why'd you do it then? Just tell him you'll do the work tomorrow. And she was like, well, the boss just told me I had to do my work. And I was like, just tell him you'll do it tomorrow. And what she told me was this, Monty, was like, it's not that like it's literal like overtime and I have to do it. It's like, he's just not going to hire me next time for that gig, or I'm not getting a promotion, am I? Because the other guy's going to do in the office, he'll do the overtime. So essentially, it's just baked into their system. This is what you do. You have to give everything for the org that owns you. They sort of are your fucking master in some fucked up Confucian sense. And you're not just going to leave and go. You're definitely not going to do it in like the Western American sense. Because I'd even say this. If anyone thinks you're going to integrate that stuff from the West, Kesper just looks at the NBA, mate, and they see shit like those superstar players just playing God with all those $100 million rosters. Like all those fuckers from the Thunder years ago have just torn all these rock fans. They look at that and they go, let's never implement that. They go back and that's terrible, that. Like it's those idiots in the West go, it's brilliant, no, it's awesome, all the money. Like they look at that and they go, let's never go down that route. Like that's why you're gonna, the joke is Riot would have to force them to implement some of these things. I even think they're only doing some of this because it's more of like a global game. They have to sort of like pretend like they're doing this to benefit the player. I don't think they really believe it does. And then the one last thing I would say is this. The reason I asked about the fakery example is this. It's because in the West, just like Doublelift does directly publicly battle for PR purposes entities he wants to get better deals from, if this was the West, Faker would be the one talking about this. Because guess what? Faker's the one who never would be able to get those tens of millions of dollars. If this system had existed in 2013, I can't see any world, Monty, where Faker could be on $20 million a year. Like, think of what he would have started with. Spoiler, in 2013 when he started, I would guess he probably made like $20,000 a year. So let's say he starts with $20K a year, you give him those 2-year deal, right? So he gets to 2 years, let's give him a 20% increase year on year. That means by like year four or something, Monty, he's only up to something ridiculous, like what, 40K or something, like where is he at like now? And even if he does another deal, because you've incentivized that it costs more to get him to another team, probably goes to T1 again. The joke is at the end, even if he was on $5 million, that would be the greatest player of all time with all his accomplishments. Only gets to 5. He'd never be at what he's at now, guys. So the sad thing is, this is almost inarguably bad for players as a general, like, broad stroke across the industry. There might be rare cases, like we say, where it's not fucked up or it just actually mandates things in an easier fashion. But the sort of the implications and the sort of like, I think the influence this will have on the industry, I think for players specifically, it's going to be rough. I think it's going to be really rough, mate.
Yeah, and as we said, with the NBA with Supermax contracts or the NFL with franchise tags, you actually end up paying more to keep these players on your rosters, but you just have the opportunity to lock them down, right?
At least franchise tag. We should talk about that because here's the thing people might not know. In fact, I'll give you an example. Dude, there was a podcast the other day I watched that was talking about this. There was a podcast. Have you ever watched that one, I Am Athlete? The one where it's those like Brandon Marshall and Ocho Cinco. It's a pretty good podcast, actually. And they always bring on NFL players, right? And they had Asante Samuels, that guy who used to be on the Patriots in the 2000s. And when this guy comes on, dude, he actually tells an anecdote about how he was like almost in tears when Bill Belichick called him and said, I'm going to franchise you. Because if you don't know, fans, even though, again, this is the perfect example. Because when they presented the franchise tag, they presented it like it was going to be good for the player and you'll get more stuff. And then in the end, half the time, it was motherfuckers like Devontae Adams, like, please do not franchise me. Please do not. Because it only fucks you as a player. It actually can be used to fuck you as a player, believe it or not.
I mean, basically, you get a 1-year deal and you get paid more than you might. But obviously, if you get injured in that year and your career ends, then you have no contract and you just get fucked. So,
or the team you would have gone to doesn't want you after that year, you know, a bunch of angles, Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.